The North African campaign of World War II thrust soldiers into an environment as unforgiving as any battlefield. The desert was vast, featureless, and unyielding. For many soldiers, it was their first time confronting such extreme and relentless conditions. The landscape was dominated by endless dunes and rocky plains, stretching far beyond the horizon. The sun burned mercilessly during the day, its heat reflecting off the sand and making every inch of exposed skin feel like it was being scorched. At night, the temperature plummeted, and the cold seeped into the bones of soldiers who had just endured the sweltering heat. It was an environment of extremes, and it demanded adaptation and endurance. For soldiers on both sides of the conflict, the desert became an enemy as formidable as any opposing force. Supplies were lifelines in this desolate terrain, with water and fuel becoming more valuable than ammunition. Each convoy carried not just the tools of war but the essentials of survival. A single lost shipment could mean dehydration or starvation for entire units, leaving them vulnerable to the elements and enemy attacks. The scarcity of resources led to desperate measures, with troops rationing water to the last drop and salvaging parts from damaged vehicles to keep their operations running. Sandstorms, a constant and unpredictable hazard, could appear without warning and bring everything to a halt. These storms were blinding and disorienting, filling the air with fine grains of sand that clogged engines, jammed weapons, and even penetrated protective goggles and clothing. Soldiers caught in the midst of a storm often found themselves stranded, unable to navigate or communicate. The storm's aftermath left vehicles buried and equipment coated with abrasive dust, forcing soldiers to spend precious hours cleaning and repairing before they could resume their missions. The heat of the desert presented its own set of challenges. Temperatures soared to unbearable levels, with many soldiers suffering from heat exhaustion and dehydration. Protective gear, while essential for shielding against the sun, became stifling and unbearable during long marches or combat operations. The constant exposure to the sun led to severe sunburns and heat stroke, conditions that could incapacitate a soldier just as effectively as enemy fire. In such conditions, every movement required calculation and effort, as the energy drained from their bodies with each step taken in the soft, shifting sand. The terrain itself posed logistical nightmares. Moving heavy machinery and supplies across the desert was a monumental task. Vehicles often became bogged down in the loose sand, requiring hours of labor to dig them out and get them moving again. Engineers had to construct makeshift roads and pathways to enable the movement of tanks, artillery, and supply trucks. Even then, the harsh environment took its toll on machinery, with engines overheating and parts wearing out faster than they could be replaced. The ingenuity and resourcefulness of the soldiers and engineers were constantly tested as they adapted their equipment and tactics to meet the demands of the desert. The soldiers themselves were a diverse group, coming from different parts of the world to fight in this foreign and hostile land. British, American, Australian, Indian, South African, and colonial troops found themselves united under the Allied banner, facing Axis forces that included German and Italian troops. For many, the desert was a completely alien environment, unlike anything they had ever experienced. The men had to quickly learn how to survive in conditions that offered no respite. From building makeshift shelters to finding ways to conserve water, every skill and ounce of creativity was called upon to endure the relentless challenges of the North African campaign. The lack of natural landmarks made navigation incredibly difficult. Maps were often unreliable, and compasses became lifelines for troops trying to find their way across the featureless terrain. Patrols and reconnaissance missions were fraught with danger, as soldiers risked getting lost or stumbling into enemy positions. Without reliable communication systems, coordination between units became a game of chance, with success often depending on the resourcefulness and determination of individual soldiers. Despite the hardships, the strategic importance of North Africa meant that the campaign could not be ignored. Control of the region was crucial for both sides, offering access to vital supply routes and the Mediterranean. Key locations like Tobruk, Benghazi, and El Alamein became focal points of intense and prolonged battles. The Allies sought to secure the Suez Canal and maintain access to Middle Eastern oil supplies, while the Axis aimed to disrupt these efforts and expand their influence in the region. The stakes were high, and the desert became the stage for some of the most grueling and decisive confrontations of the war. Soldiers on the front lines often faced extended periods of isolation, cut off from reinforcements and resupply. The desert's vastness meant that entire units could disappear into its expanse, their fates unknown for days or weeks. Communication lines were fragile and easily disrupted, leaving troops to rely on their own initiative and resourcefulness. The psychological toll of such isolation was immense, with many soldiers struggling to maintain morale in the face of overwhelming odds. Letters from home became precious commodities, offering a brief connection to the lives they had left behind. Animals, both domestic and wild, played unexpected roles in the campaign. Camels and mules were used to transport supplies through areas where vehicles could not travel, their endurance and adaptability making them invaluable in the harsh terrain. Meanwhile, encounters with scorpions, snakes, and other desert creatures added an element of danger to everyday tasks. Soldiers had to be constantly vigilant, as a single bite or sting could prove fatal in an environment where medical help was often far away. The bonds formed between soldiers in these conditions were unbreakable, forged through shared hardship and the constant struggle for survival. Comradeship became a source of strength, as men relied on each other to endure the desert's challenges. These bonds often transcended national and cultural boundaries, uniting soldiers in a common purpose despite their differences. Acts of kindness and generosity were common, with troops sharing their meager rations and supporting one another through the toughest of times. The North African campaign was not just a test of military strategy and firepower, but also a testament to the human spirit's resilience and adaptability. The soldiers who fought in the desert faced conditions that seemed designed to break them, yet they endured and overcame. Their stories of courage and perseverance serve as a reminder of the sacrifices made and the extraordinary challenges they faced in one of the most inhospitable environments on Earth. The vast, barren expanses of the North African desert posed unprecedented logistical and survival challenges during World War II. For armies fighting in this unforgiving terrain, the supply chain became not only a matter of strategy but also of survival. Soldiers required water, food, fuel, and ammunition to fight and endure, and delivering these essentials across hundreds of miles of featureless desert was a monumental task. Both Axis and Allied forces had to innovate constantly, adapting their logistics and tactics to the unique demands of the desert environment. Convoys became the lifeblood of desert warfare. Long lines of trucks, jeeps, and tank transporters carried supplies across treacherous terrain, often under the threat of ambush or air raids. The lack of reliable roads meant that vehicles frequently bogged down in the loose sand, requiring hours of backbreaking effort to free them. Engineers were essential in these operations, constructing makeshift roads and bridges to keep the supply lines moving. Even with these efforts, the distances involved often meant that convoys took days or even weeks to reach their destinations, and any delay could have disastrous consequences. Fuel was particularly critical, as vehicles and tanks consumed enormous quantities of it to traverse the harsh terrain. The logistical demands of maintaining a mechanized army in the desert were staggering. A single tank division required thousands of gallons of fuel daily, along with spare parts to repair the inevitable wear and tear caused by the abrasive sand and extreme temperatures. Soldiers learned to improvise, using captured enemy fuel and scavenging from disabled vehicles to keep their own machines running. The desert became a graveyard for equipment, with countless vehicles abandoned when they broke down beyond repair. Water was another precious resource, often more valuable than ammunition. The desert's heat and arid conditions caused dehydration to set in quickly, making a reliable water supply essential for survival. Troops carried water in metal canisters, rationed carefully to ensure it lasted as long as possible. Soldiers were taught to conserve water by drinking only when absolutely necessary, but even these precautions often proved insufficient. Water shortages were a constant threat, and men would risk their lives to retrieve supplies from contested areas. In some cases, soldiers were forced to drink from contaminated sources, leading to outbreaks of disease that claimed as many lives as combat. The harsh environment demanded innovative tactics and equipment. The Allies, for example, developed specialized units like the Long Range Desert Group, LRDG, which used modified vehicles to conduct deep reconnaissance and disrupt enemy supply lines. These vehicles, often stripped of unnecessary weight and equipped with oversized tires, were designed to navigate the difficult terrain with minimal resources. The LRDG became experts in desert navigation, using landmarks, stars, and compasses to find their way in a landscape that offered few points of reference. The Axis forces, particularly the German Afrika Korps under Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, also adapted their tactics to the desert. Rommel's use of mobile warfare, a desert adaptation of the Blitzkrieg strategy, relied on the rapid movement of tanks and infantry to outflank and overwhelm the enemy. His ability to exploit the open terrain and strike quickly earned him the nickname, the Desert Fox. However, even Rommel's forces were not immune to the challenges of desert logistics. The Afrika Korps often struggled to maintain its supply lines, particularly as Allied naval and air forces targeted Axis convoys crossing the Mediterranean. Ambushes and air raids were constant threats to supply convoys. The flat, open terrain of the desert offered little cover, making vehicles easy targets for enemy aircraft. Convoys had to travel in tightly coordinated formations, with anti-aircraft guns positioned to fend off attacks. Despite these precautions, many convoys were destroyed, leaving entire units stranded without the supplies they needed to fight or survive. The loss of a single convoy could tip the balance of a battle, as troops found themselves without the resources to continue their operations. The desert's extreme temperatures further complicated logistics. During the day, the heat was intense enough to cause vehicles to overheat and tires to melt. Soldiers often had to wait until nightfall to conduct repairs, working in near total darkness to avoid detection by the enemy. At night, the temperature dropped dramatically, leaving troops shivering in their makeshift camps. The constant cycle of heat and cold took a toll on both men and machines, making even routine tasks a test of endurance. One of the most significant challenges of desert warfare was the maintenance of vehicles. Sand was an ever-present enemy, infiltrating engines, weapons, and moving parts. Soldiers became adept at field repairs, using whatever materials were available to keep their vehicles operational. Improvisation was often the key to survival, as spare parts were in short supply and resupply missions were frequently delayed. Mechanics worked tirelessly to keep the machines of war running, often under fire and in conditions that tested their skills and resilience to the limit. Communication was another critical challenge. Radio signals often struggled to carry over the vast distances of the desert, and sandstorms could disrupt transmissions entirely. Units relied on messengers and signal flares to convey orders, but these methods were slow and prone to interception. The lack of reliable communication made coordination between units difficult, leading to confusion and missed opportunities on the battlefield. Soldiers often had to rely on their own initiative and judgment, as they could not always count on receiving clear instructions from their commanders. Despite the many hardships, the desert also offered some advantages to those who could master its challenges. The open terrain allowed for the rapid movement of troops and vehicles, enabling commanders to execute bold flanking maneuvers and surprise attacks. The flat ground was ideal for the use of tanks, which could dominate the battlefield with their mobility and firepower. Both sides sought to exploit these advantages, leading to some of the most dynamic and fluid battles of the war. Survival in the desert required adaptability and ingenuity. Soldiers learned to make the most of their limited resources, using captured enemy equipment and supplies whenever possible. Water from enemy stores was treated as a prize, and captured vehicles were often repurposed to bolster their own forces. Camouflage became an art form, with units using nets, paint, and even local vegetation to conceal their positions from enemy reconnaissance planes. These techniques helped to level the playing field, allowing troops to hold their ground against numerically superior forces. The logistical challenges of the North African campaign shaped the course of the war and tested the resolve of those who fought there. Every battle was a contest of endurance, as soldiers faced not only their enemies but also the unrelenting desert. The ability to innovate and adapt became the key to survival, as both Axis and Allied forces struggled to overcome the obstacles presented by this harsh and unforgiving environment. In the end, it was not just strategy and firepower that determined the outcome of the campaign, but the ingenuity and resilience of the men who fought it. The North African campaign of World War II was as much a test of human endurance as it was a contest of strategy and firepower. For the soldiers who fought in the unforgiving deserts of North Africa, survival often hinged on their ability to endure not just the enemy's attacks but also the brutal conditions imposed by the desert itself. The human cost of this campaign was staggering, with many succumbing to the harsh environment as well as to combat. Heat stroke, dehydration, dysentery, and venomous creatures were ever-present threats, rivaling the dangers posed by bullets and bombs. The daily struggle for water was perhaps the most harrowing aspect of life for the soldiers. The relentless sun scorched the earth, draining moisture from everything it touched. Dehydration was a constant threat, and the water rationing necessary to sustain troops often left men weak and unable to focus. In some cases, soldiers resorted to drinking from contaminated sources, knowing full well the risk of disease. Dysentery, a common result of drinking unclean water, claimed the lives of many. Even those who survived the illness were left weakened, their bodies ravaged by the infection. Food supplies, too, were a major concern. The logistical challenges of transporting fresh rations across vast, featureless deserts meant that soldiers often subsisted on preserved and dehydrated foods. These meals, while sufficient to provide basic sustenance, offered little in the way of variety or nutrition. Malnutrition and vitamin deficiencies were common, further weakening troops who were already struggling to endure the heat and the physical demands of combat. Soldiers often spoke of their longing for fresh food and the morale boost it provided when occasional shipments of fruits or vegetables arrived. The desert itself seemed alive with dangers. Scorpions, snakes, and other venomous creatures thrived in the arid environment, posing a constant threat to unwary soldiers. A single sting or bite could prove fatal in an environment where medical treatment was often far away. Soldiers learned to shake out their boots and inspect their bedding meticulously, but even the most vigilant could fall victim to these hidden dangers. The psychological toll of constantly being on guard against such threats added to the stress of life in the desert. Combat in the North African campaign was grueling and unrelenting. The harsh environment amplified every challenge faced by the soldiers. Weapons and equipment, designed for use in more temperate climates, often failed under the extreme conditions. Sand infiltrated everything, jamming rifles, clogging engine parts, and wearing down moving components. Soldiers had to clean and maintain their equipment constantly, knowing that even a momentary lapse could render it useless in the heat of battle. Despite the hardships, soldiers displayed remarkable resilience and adaptability. Camaraderie and mutual support became lifelines in the face of adversity. Men relied on each other for encouragement and assistance, forming bonds that transcended nationalities and backgrounds. British, American, Australian, Indian, and South African troops fought side by side, their shared experiences in the desert forging a sense of unity and purpose. Even among Axis forces, the German Afrika Korps and their Italian allies found strength in their shared struggle against the Allied advance. The psychological toll of the North African campaign was immense. Soldiers endured long periods of isolation, often cut off from their families and the comforts of home. Letters from loved ones became treasured possessions, read and reread during rare moments of quiet. The vastness of the desert, with its featureless expanses and unchanging horizons, created a sense of disorientation and monotony that weighed heavily on the mind. The constant threat of ambush, air raids, and artillery fire added to the stress, leaving many soldiers with lasting scars, both physical and emotional. One of the most grueling aspects of the campaign was the physical exhaustion that accompanied combat in the desert. Soldiers carried heavy loads of equipment, ammunition, and supplies, often for miles at a time under the blazing sun. The soft sand sapped their energy with every step, turning even short marches into tests of endurance. The heat reflected off the ground, creating an oppressive atmosphere that left men drenched in sweat and gasping for breath. Rest was a luxury, and many soldiers pushed themselves to the limits of their physical capabilities simply to survive. Medical care in the desert was limited at best. Field hospitals were set up in makeshift tents or under the shade of sparse trees, providing only the most basic treatment for wounds and illnesses. The lack of proper facilities and supplies often meant that soldiers had to endure pain and suffering with little relief. Infections were a constant danger, as wounds quickly became contaminated by sand and dirt. For many, the journey to a proper hospital was a long and perilous one, and countless lives were lost before help could arrive. Acts of heroism and humanity were not uncommon, even in the midst of such hardship. Soldiers often risked their lives to rescue wounded comrades, carrying them across open ground under enemy fire to reach safety. Prisoners of war, though often treated with suspicion, were sometimes given water and food by their captors, a small gesture of compassion in an otherwise brutal conflict. These moments of kindness and bravery served as reminders of the shared humanity that existed on both sides of the war. For those who survived the North African campaign, the memories of the desert remained vivid long after the war ended. Many spoke of the beauty they had found in the harsh landscape, from the brilliant colors of a desert sunrise to the stillness of the starlit nights. Yet these moments of peace were fleeting, overshadowed by the constant struggle for survival. The scars left by the campaign were not easily forgotten, and many veterans carried the physical and emotional wounds of their experiences for the rest of their lives. The human cost of the North African campaign was staggering, with thousands of lives lost to combat, disease, and the unforgiving environment. Yet the resilience and determination of the soldiers who fought there were equally remarkable. Their ability to adapt to the challenges of desert warfare, to endure the hardships of combat and survival, and to support one another in the face of overwhelming odds stands as a testament to the strength of the human spirit. The campaign was a crucible that tested not only military strategy and tactics but also the character and resolve of those who fought in one of the most inhospitable environments on Earth. The Second Battle of El Alamein stands as a pivotal moment in the North African campaign, and one of the most significant turning points of World War II. Fought between October 23 and November 11, 1942, it was a clash of wills between two of the war's most renowned commanders, General Bernard Montgomery of the Allies and Field Marshal Erwin Rommel of the Axis forces. The battle was not only a test of strategy and resources but also a grueling contest of endurance and determination fought under the harsh and unforgiving conditions of the desert. Before the battle began, both sides understood the stakes. For the Allies, El Alamein represented an opportunity to break the Axis stronghold in North Africa and turn the tide of the campaign. For Rommel, holding the line at El Alamein was crucial to maintaining Axis control of the region and securing vital supply routes to Europe. The battlefield itself was strategically significant, with its position along the Mediterranean coast and proximity to the Suez Canal making it a key objective for both sides. Montgomery, who had recently taken command of the British 8th Army, recognized the importance of thorough preparation and meticulous planning. His strategy for El Alamein involved a combination of deception, attrition, and overwhelming force. He worked tirelessly to rebuild the morale and confidence of his troops, emphasizing discipline and unity. The Allies also benefited from improved logistics, with steady supplies of fuel, ammunition, and reinforcements arriving from across the Mediterranean. These resources gave Montgomery a significant advantage over Rommel, whose Africa Corps was plagued by shortages of fuel and supplies due to the effective Allied naval blockade. The battle began with a massive artillery barrage on the night of October 23, 1942. Thousands of guns opened fire simultaneously, lighting up the desert sky and creating a deafening roar that signaled the start of the Allied offensive. The barrage targeted Axis positions along a wide front, aiming to weaken their defenses and create opportunities for the infantry and armored divisions to advance. The sheer intensity of the bombardment was unprecedented, marking a dramatic shift in the tempo of the North African campaign. Following the artillery barrage, Allied infantry launched an assault on the Axis defenses. The initial attacks were met with fierce resistance, as Rommel's troops had fortified their positions with minefields, barbed wire, and anti-tank guns. The dense network of defenses, known as the Devil's Garden, slowed the Allied advance and inflicted heavy casualties. Despite these obstacles, Montgomery's troops pressed forward, using specialized mine-clearing equipment and coordinated attacks to breach the Axis lines. As the battle progressed, it became a war of attrition. Montgomery's strategy relied on wearing down the Axis forces through constant pressure and relentless attacks. The Allies employed a combination of infantry, tanks, and air support to maintain their momentum, while Rommel's forces fought desperately to hold their ground. The desert terrain added another layer of difficulty, with swirling sandstorms and searing heat testing the endurance of soldiers on both sides. One of the key moments of the battle came on November 2, 1942, when Montgomery launched Operation Supercharge, a concentrated assault aimed at breaking through the Axis defenses. The operation involved a massive armored push, with hundreds of tanks advancing across the battlefield in a coordinated effort to overwhelm the enemy. The fighting was intense and chaotic, with tank battles raging across the desert as both sides struggled for control. The superior numbers and firepower of the Allied tanks eventually gave them the upper hand, forcing Rommel's forces to retreat. Rommel, who had earned a reputation as a brilliant tactician, faced an impossible situation. His troops were outnumbered and outgunned, and his supply lines were severely strained. Despite his efforts to regroup and mount a counterattack, the constant pressure from Montgomery's forces proved too much to withstand. On November 4, 1942, Rommel ordered a general retreat, signaling the end of the battle and a decisive victory for the Allies. The Second Battle of El Alamein marked a turning point not only in the North African campaign, but also in the broader context of World War II. It was the first major Allied victory in the war and demonstrated the effectiveness of coordinated planning, superior logistics, and disciplined execution. The victory at El Alamein boosted the morale of Allied forces and set the stage for subsequent offensives that would eventually drive the Axis out of North Africa. For the soldiers who fought at El Alamein, the battle was a harrowing experience. The relentless artillery fire, intense heat, and constant threat of enemy attacks created an environment of unrelenting tension and danger. Many soldiers described the battle as one of the most grueling and exhausting experiences of their lives, with the physical and emotional toll leaving lasting scars. Yet, amidst the chaos and destruction, acts of bravery and camaraderie emerged, with soldiers supporting one another in the face of adversity. The victory at El Alamein was not achieved without significant sacrifices. The Allied forces suffered heavy casualties, with thousands of soldiers killed, wounded, or missing in action. The Axis forces, too, paid a high price, with many troops captured or lost during the retreat. The human cost of the battle underscored the harsh realities of war and the profound impact it had on the lives of those who fought. The legacy of the Second Battle of El Alamein extends beyond its immediate military significance. It symbolized the resilience and determination of the Allied forces, who overcame immense challenges to achieve a decisive victory. The battle also highlighted the importance of leadership, with Montgomery's strategic vision and ability to inspire his troops playing a crucial role in the outcome. For Rommel, the defeat marked the beginning of the end for the Afrika Korps, as the Axis forces were steadily pushed back in the months that followed. In the aftermath of the battle, the Allies gained momentum in the North African campaign, launching a series of offensives that ultimately led to the surrender of Axis forces in Tunisia in May 1943. The victory at El Alamein paved the way for the Allied invasion of Italy and the eventual liberation of Europe, marking a significant turning point in the war. The Second Battle of El Alamein remains a defining moment in military history, remembered for its strategic importance, the bravery of the soldiers who fought, and the enduring lessons it offers about the complexities of warfare. It serves as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the extraordinary efforts required to overcome adversity in one of the most challenging environments on Earth.